Hi, Betty. I am not in the outdoor classroom today because it was raining on me. I walked out there and was like, it's raining. We're going to do the time period 6 review from my kitchen. And then Monday will be the last time period review that you guys are going to do. Suggested due date is Monday for time period 7. And then we will talk about the APUSH rubric, the new rubric. It's not a whole lot different. If you do it well and you understand it pretty well, it actually is a little bit easier to earn some points. That'll be good. The issue you guys are going to have is 45 minutes. It's not a lot of time. The nice thing about the way that we're putting these period reviews together is that they are sort of a encapsulated reference. So every time we say like, oh, there's a chart, oh, there's this, oh, there's that, kind of put it all together and have it handy. Because if something, slips your mind, you can kind of just look real quick and jog your memory. It is my understanding at this time. The only thing that you're not allowed to do is chat with each other. But I think you are, 45 minutes is not a lot of time. So you're not going to be able to like read through copious amounts of resources. But if you just need to double check a date or double check a fact, these are going to be super handy to have. So that'll be really good. The other thing that's going to be key for this CBQ is going to be planning. So we're going to go over some of that and do some practice with that in the coming weeks once we finish these period reviews. I hope these are helping you. I hope you're using the Gilder Lehrman site. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's all coming back. I love these. I've gotten really good feedback on them. Students have said like they didn't have to do anything else to study for the exam because this was everything they needed, and they did real well, and it was all there. To get a 5, again, you're going to have to do more than just these period reviews. You should be reading Don't Know Much About History. You should be looking at the videos on College Board. You should be really working on making connections, practicing some essays, planning out some different essays, looking at those big themes, those big ideas, and trying to fit them all together. That stuff's going to be really important. All right, so time period 6 is an important time period. Not as a standalone time period in the way that 3 and 7 are. It is an important time period because it's the vehicle by which we move into that sort of more modern time period. We go from this really old-timey kind of fledgling country into this industrial nation, and then sort of sets us up for that really formative time period 7, where we kind of become who we are. So 6 is important, and it's really the key to 6 is being able to use it to make connections to the other time periods. So that if you can pull stuff from 6 to connect to a larger essay, that's going to be the key for a lot of you guys to success, is being able to really understand this. Now, the nice part about 6 is this industrialization. So, you learned industrialization pretty well in world history, whether you had AP or honors. And because I know the teachers, I know what lesson plans they taught, they did a great job. So you guys know industrialization pretty well. The themes are the same globally, right? The stuff that's happening industrially in the world is similar to the stuff that happens in the United States. Patterns are the same. So if you learned it really well in Great Britain, you just apply the same themes that you learned, Mary Poppins, and what happens in Mary Poppins very similarly happens in the United States. So same kind of idea. That's kind of, you just have to think thematically in that way. Okay? Sweet. All right, time period 6. So my timeline for this is just 1 page, and I just have a couple little extra events on the side. You can see it. You guys probably pause on this and copy mine, don't you? Now some of you are like, oh, I never even thought of that, Ms. Sears. Great, now she tells us. 1867 was the Alaska Purchase. That was Seward's Folly. We did some notes on that. That was pretty important. We wrote an expansionism DBQ. So that was kind of a big deal. 1869, Transcontinental Railroad. The railroad's going to be important, right? The railroad is the thing that connects our country. It makes our country, we're connected from sea to sea because of the railroad. We no longer, and in the time before the Panama Canal, when we used to have to go all the way around the tip of South America, the railroad is huge, it's such a big deal for us. I think my husband and I are going to start watching Hell on Wheels again, which is the railroad show on AMC. I'm ready to watch Anson Mount. 1970, Standard Oil. So Standard Oil Trust, that's John D. Rockefeller. You should be able to take the robber barons and associate them with their business. So you should be able to say Rockefeller, Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel, JP Morgan was the trust guy, the banks, right? So, you should be able to kind of put them together in that way. 1871, immigration increases, and also with the Indian Appropriation Act. Yellowstone National Park Act in 1872. Munn versus Illinois, that was the regulation of the railroads. It was one of the Granger cases. And the idea that the federal government can regulate interstate commerce from state to state. And that was because the railroads were like all over the place. And now that the railroads were going to move us and move business from state to state to state, and they were going to do it in a much more efficient way, the Supreme Court had to weigh in and say, like, no, the federal government regulates this constitutionally. So that's important, really important. 1872 is also the Credit Mobilier scandal. So that's the one where they, that was the weird one where they like bought there was like the railroad company, and then there was like some people from I think it was the Union Pacific Railroad. They bought, they created a construction company called Credit Mobilier, and then they bid on construction contracts with the railroad, but they bid at like 3 times what the normal rate would be, and then told everybody in the railroad, like, hey, you should use this company, it's really good. But they didn't disclose they were part of that company. So that's illegal now, but it wasn't illegal then. So they were basically stealing money from their partners, which is pretty crappy. 1873 is the Panic of 1873. Again, just thematically learn the panics. You don't necessarily, I've not seen evidence that you need to learn every single one. That would be a waste of your time. 1875, Carnegie Steel opens, and there's also the whiskey ring scandal. That was Ulysses S. Grant, and he just like had bad like advisors, and his, do I have that right? Yeah, he had bad advisors basically, and they just like gave him a bum steer. 1876 is the Battle of Little Bighorn. That's Indian Wars. So we have the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Battle of Wounded Knee. The Battle of Little Bighorn is where the Native Americans, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, defeat General Custer. They defeat General Custer, and then I think it's the 7th Cavalry, and then the 7th Cavalry comes back, and that's all the ghost dance movement, right? They get confined, the Native Americans get confined to the reservation, but because they believe that the buffalo like have to be regenerated through this like certain spiritual practice, they like kept leaving the reservation because that was what the spiritual practice required. And then Custer's 7th Cavalry like chased them around, and then they ended up fighting again in the Battle of Wounded Knee, and that's the Native Americans got like slaughtered. And that's commonly referred to as the end of the 300-year conflict known as the Indian Wars, the Native American, United States Indian Wars. It didn't end well for the Native Americans. Let's see. 1877 is the Nez Perce War. And there's also the railway strike of 1877. We did a labor chart, so you might want to take that and put it with time period 6. 1881, James Garfield is assassinated. He's shot in the back by a disgruntled civil servant. This guy had like lost his job because he lost his like civil service job because of some reform that Garfield was making, saying that like you had to be qualified to do the job and pass this test or whatever. So this guy got laid off, and then he killed Garfield. He shot him in the back. It was actually the medical treatment that killed him, but we still say he was assassinated by that guy. 1882 is the Chinese Exclusion Act. We looked at a political cartoon on that. We did a short answer practice. And then Standard Oil Trust is formed. So Standard Oil Company is different than the trust. The trust is a conglomeration. It's a merger of companies. And I need to put up like a graphic or something so you guys can see the difference between trust and holding companies. Because that's kind of a thing that was going on during this time. 1883 as the Pendleton Civil Service Act. So that's civil service reform. We talked about civil service in class when we did this, how civil service is a little bit weird because we don't really think of being a civil servant as like a job that you want to do now. But like then it was, because the opportunity to work inside and work in an office and, you know, have a relatively low risk job was very important for people. So they were using these government jobs, these civil servant jobs, to reward people for vote. The North Pacific Railroad is also completed in 1883. In 1884, Grover Cleveland is elected. Grover Cleveland is the only president in United States history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Fun fact about him. 1885, Huck Finn is published. 1886 is the Haymarket Square riot. That's the one with the bombing. Again, it's on the labor chart. The AFL is also founded, the American Federation of Labor. In 1887, we passed the Interstate Commerce Act, and that's going to uphold the Munn versus Illinois ruling that the federal government is going to regulate commerce from state to state. The federal government regulates commerce between the states. The states regulate commerce inside of their own state. And that's constitutional. The Dawes Act is also passed in 1887. So remember I told you guys there's 2 Dawes Acts. There's the 1920s Dawes Act and there's the 1880s Dawes Act. The 1880s Dawes Act, the one we're on right now, is related to westward expansion and the Native Americans. It's also known as the General Allotment Act. So it's the one where I think they're given like some land that is intended to Americanize Native Americans. Okay, by giving them some land in the West so that they could like become more, I don't know how to say it. They wanted them to become like more traditional farmers, but like, I don't know. It's weird to say they wanted Native Americans to become more American farmers because like, you see what I'm saying? You understand, right? I'm conflicted about this. Let's see. 1889, Hull House is open. Okay, so that's going to be part of the settlement house movement. That's Jane Addams. She sets it up in Chicago, and the settlement house is going to move into the next time period with the progressives because those are the social reformers who believe that they need to contribute to society. What Hull House did and what the settlement house movement did was it helped the urban poor, specifically focusing on immigrants and women by offering like childcare services, after school activities, English language lessons, job training, job support, that kind of stuff. 1890, the bison are driven to near extinction. 1890, Jacob Riis also puts out his series, How the Other Half Lives, which focuses on tenement living. We also have the Sherman Antitrust Act, which makes the formation of trust mergers illegal. And is the way that actually John D. Rockefeller and the Standard Oil Trust is broken up. Because at one point, John Rockefeller owned 98% of the country's oil wealth. 1890 is also the McKinley Tariff and the Wounded Knee Massacre, which is the end of the 300-year conflict known as the Indian Wars. 1891, we annexed Hawaii, which we talked about, and we did we read a thing about it, and we took some notes on it, and then you guys wrote DBQ related to that. And the annexation of Hawaii was the thing with Sanford B. Dole, the pineapple guy, taking over Queen Liliuokalani. They put her under house arrest. And then we took Hawaii. It was because they didn't want to pay the McKinley tariff. So they just wanted Hawaii to be considered part of the United States because that's where we were getting most of our fruit and our sugar. Okay. 1892, GE, General Electric, is formed. Ellis Island is opened. If you've never had a chance to go to Ellis Island, you should. It's super cool. It's in New York. Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty. Super, super, super fun. One of my favorite field trips. And then, on the East Coast, we have Ellis Island as the immigration center. On the West Coast, it was called Angel Island. I've never been there, but it's on my bucket list. Of course it is. 1892 is also the Homestead Strike. That was the one with the Pinkerton guards where they hired that like separate contracting group and they came in and then like there was like shooting. And anyway, guys, all the strikes, all these labor strikes during this time end up being problematic for labor because they just make labor look bad. And remember, we did those 20s cartoons where everybody starts saying, oh, labor is terrible and socialist and all that. Let's see. Okay, 1893 is the Populist Party Convention. So populism is derived from the word popular, and essentially they considered themselves the party of the people. They were the People's Party. And then what they decided was that the government had strayed too far from what the people actually needed, and so they created the Populist Party. The Populist Party was going to run based on helping everyday people and everyday workers and farmers in particular. So they were absorbing those Granger movement platforms and trying to keep those going politically. So 1893 is the Populist Party Convention, and then the Panic of 1893. 1894 is Coxey's Army. So that's 1894 is also the Pullman Strike, which is a strike of the railroads. 1895 is Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise speech. You guys need to make sure you know the difference between Booker T. Washington and Webb Du Bois. It comes up again and again. The idea is that they're kind of they're two foils in the movement, the early African American civil rights movement. Booker T. Washington believed that African Americans, he created the Tuskegee Institute. We did a Venn diagram on it, or a chart. You guys did a chart. It's in your notes. But Booker T. Washington created the Tuskegee Institute and believed that African Americans needed to prove their worth in society by learning useful labor skills. Webb Du Bois was the first African American to graduate from Harvard, and he believed in that African Americans should get college educations and become the leaders in society. And his concept was called the talented 10th. So that upper 10% of African Americans should become the leaders in society is what he believed. And I always think of the Obamas when I think of Webb Du Bois. I think they're exactly who he was talking about. So it's pretty cool to make that connection. Let's see. 1896 is Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson is the Supreme Court case that sets up the separate but equal doctrine. Okay. Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, separate but equal. Okay, this is not going to be overturned until 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education. So Plessy versus Ferguson sets up the separate but equal doctrine, which lays the foundation for the Jim Crow South, which is the system of segregation, the system of legalized segregation that we had in the Southern United States. Okay, that is not going to be overturned until 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. Got it? Okay. Important. 1896 is also the Populists versus the Republicans versus the Democrats. The election of 1896, the Populist Party tries to run for president. And this is where they had that whole conflict over the gold standard because of the Panic of 1893, where people were really struggling. Farmers were struggling. Our money had actually, because it was backed by gold, our money had too much value. And so there was not enough of it in the hands of the people. So they couldn't use it. So we did kind of a weird thing. We started talking about how we wanted to devalue our currency, which is not normally something that we do, but sometimes it's necessary because remember, money has to keep flowing. So what the Populist Party wanted to do is they wanted the money to be backed by both gold and silver. That concept is called bimetallism because two metals. So the Populists and the Democrats were in favor of bimetallism, okay? And then the candidate that they put up was a guy named William Jennings Bryan. He's also the guy from, if you guys read Inherit the Wind, he's the fundamentalist who was against evolution. He ran for president like 3 or 4 times, and it's not on the president's wall, so he obviously never won. Like Henry Clay. And so but he ran, this was one of the first times he ran, and he gave this really famous speech called The Cross of Gold. We don't read it because it's actually a little bit confusing if you just kind of remember it, but he gives this speech where he basically he's using hyperbole to support the idea that we need to open up our currency and devalue it and add both gold and silver to back the money. William Jennings Bryan runs against Republican candidate William McKinley. William McKinley goes ahead and also, even though he was in favor of the gold standard, he eventually realizes that it's something that the country needs to do, bimetallism. And so he adopts that bimetalist idea. And then the Populist Party kind of crumbles and he wins. So the Republican, William McKinley, is the one who wins the election of 1896. Okay? So those are our factoids. That's our timeline. Okay, now I'm on the continuities and changes part. So here's my continuities. There's my changes. Quick, pause the screen. I miss you guys. This is really hard. I do not like teaching like this. Okay, labor disputes. So the trend that I have is labor disputes. Haymarket Square and the railroad strike, and that's all linked to the rise. I connected that to the rise of socialism. Indian conflicts, the examples I give are the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Nez Perce War. And I connect that to the Indian Removal Act, and you can even connect it to Japanese American internment. Not because the Japanese Americans are Indians, because they're not, but because that had a very similar feel to it, where it's people who should be American citizens, but aren't really being treated like American citizens. And we're saying it's a matter of national security, but I mean, okay, is it? It's debatable. How about that? Immigration, always, because we're a nation of immigrants. The Chinese Exclusion Act, and I linked that to the Alien and Sedition Act. You could also link it to the Alien Enemies Act. The Alien and Sedition Act is always around, so continuity. Restrictions on immigration is another continuity. We always have immigrants. We're always talking about restricting immigrants. Okay. There's a big virus right now, and we've restricted immigration. See, we did it again. There it is. Okay. Not that I'm for or against that, just it's an example of something that we're doing. See, it's a continuity. Economic recession is, look at that, another continuity. The Panic of 1893 is the example. You could link it to the Great Depression, to the 90s recession. You could link it to now, but you shouldn't, because now is current and not historical, but it will be. In 20 years, I'm going to be like, hey, remember the pandemic of 2020? There you go. Economic recession. Social activism is a continuity. Settlement houses and Hull House. You could relate that to gay rights. You could relate it to the civil rights movement. We're always socially active in our country. There's a lot of social activism. Government scandal is another one. So you could link that to the whiskey ring scandal, the Credit Mobilier scandal, the XYZ affair, the Peggy Eaton affair, and Monica Lewinsky in the 90s. I mean, there's a bunch of political scandal now too. So, but again, now it's not history. Okay, change. So change, the rise of labor unions is a change, which is going to lead to socialism. The Transcontinental Railroad is an enormous change, huge change, changes our country so much. Civil service reform, that's another change. All right, cause and effect, I just have one. Well, I wrote the rise of labor union, but then I didn't write what causes and effects are. I mean, I guess the cause of the rise of labor unions would be like the poor working conditions in the factories. And then the effect is like very mixed for labor unions, because we looked at that like chart. Remember when we did the DBQ, we did that practice, we analyzed those labor documents from that old DBQ, and we looked at that chart and we started to see that like the labor unions, like to some extent, like over time, they do help working conditions, but like it's a very slow process. So the effect is that over the long-term effect is that eventually work and stuff does get better. And we do have regulation that ends up making people happier and healthier and safer. But the short-term effect is that it starts to like get people really paranoid that like labor unions are socialist and, that they're trying to like ruin the country, which they're not. There's also like violent like strikes and stuff. So, okay, railroad was the next one that I put for causes and effects. And the long-term effect of the long-term cause of the railroad was the market revolution and westward expansion. The short-term cause was the robber barons and the gold rush, because we want to get out there and we want to be able to move our goods. The short-term effect of the railroad, well, there's obviously like, people move pretty quickly, right? And then the long-term effect is going to be the increasing connectivity of the United States. So you can compare, so I'm in the comparison part. You can compare populists and Republicans. You actually should be able to compare populists and Republicans. You can compare farmers and industrialists. We should be able to do that too, be able to talk about the Grangers. The Reconstruction South and the Industrial North, or the Wild West. We should be able to compare those. The annexation of Hawaii versus the purchase of Alaska. Look at that. And here's my causes and effects. That part's not that good, sorry. And there's my compares. All right, now here's my sticky note with the big ideas. It's kind of rumpled. Okay. You see it? Okay. It's so low tech. It's like so low tech and so high tech all at the same time. I'm very philosophical today. Okay. So time period 6. Populism is a huge trend. Indian wars is a huge trend. The frontier and westward expansion is another big idea. Labor unrest. We're going to lead into, for the next time period, the Spanish-American War and how all this is going to set up the Spanish-American War and the United States being involved in global conflicts. The Gilded Age, which is like the rise of big business and the excesses that the robber barons and all that stuff took. Settlement houses and social reformers, and then the political machines, which we did not really go over on the timeline. But the political machine is going to be Tammany Hall, and that's going to be the whole idea that's Thomas Nast brings down Boss Tweed in New York City. But it's the whole idea of political corruption. And we looked at a bunch of political cartoons about that. The one who counts the votes is the one who kind of gets elected at this point. And so the political machines and political corruption is a really big issue in United States history during this time. And we have notes on it. And there's notes on my website. You guys took notes on it. So that's time period 6. So Monday is time period 7, which will be our last one. And then we'll start rolling out some, I'll roll out a schedule for you guys to schedule phone calls so we can discuss. And we can do some text chat on Teams for you guys to ask any questions that you want to ask. There was one more thing. Oh, and then we have to look at the new DBQ rubric. So I'll start working on all of that. I have graded period 1 up through, I've graded class period 1 up through time period 3, the ones that I have. So I'm going to work as hard as I can on the rest of those to get you guys done and in and get your grades in the grade book. But, we're all doing the best we can. I heard that most of you have your AP exam on the 15th. So, I think we're in good shape. We're fine. We're doing great. Contact me if you get some questions. I'm available on Remind, and I'm available on email, and I'm available on Teams. Remind is really probably the best way after my office hours to get in touch with me, because at this point I'm about to log off, and then the other 4 people I live with are going to start stealing my Wi-Fi and using my computer. So I hope you all are healthy and well, and I miss you kind of now more than ever. And, I will see you all very soon. Bye.